This is a Short Stack production. Welcome to No Sleep Shorts, where nightmares take only seconds to begin, but stay with you forever. Viewer discretion advised. I've always been a lurker on Reddit, scanning the No Sleep subreddit late into the night, watching the clock tick past 2 a.m. You might say I've been fascinated by creepy stories since I was a kid, always staying up to read them in the glow of my phone under the covers. But I never expected to write one myself, and I certainly never expected it would be about me. This isn't some fictional piece or an inspired by post. It's the account of something that happened less than a year ago in my own apartment with people I know. I'm still shaken up when I think about it. If you're easily scared, maybe skip this post. Last summer, I moved into a small apartment in a not-so-great area of town. I just graduated from college and needed a place that fit my tiny budget. The building was old but had that charming history vibe. Most people complained about the rattling pipes and flickering lights, but I liked the older architecture. It felt warm, lived in, maybe even a little haunted in a fun, kitschy way. The apartment layout was simple. A living room connected to a small kitchenette, one cramped bedroom, and a bathroom with tiles that never seemed to come fully clean. The walls were plaster, thick enough that you'd have to bang them pretty hard for anyone next door to hear. Still, I sometimes heard odd noises in the night. This was my first time living alone, so everything made me jump. The hum of the fridge, the creaks in the floorboards, the wind whistling through the old window frames. At first, I chalked it up to my own imagination, but soon I began to realize something else was going on. A few weeks in, I noticed a faint static noise coming from somewhere near my bedroom wall. It wasn't constant. It would just drift in and out, usually late at night. It was kind of like the scratchy sound you get when you flip through radio stations. But I never had a radio on, and my phone was always on silent before bed. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I couldn't quite tell if it was coming from my apartment or next door. It always seemed inside the wall, like some old wires were picking up a stray signal. Annoyed, I asked my neighbor, Trish, if she played the radio at weird hours. She said no. In fact, she heard my TV on at odd hours sometimes. That's when I realized she heard my TV and I heard her radio. Except, neither of us was turning anything on at these times. The building was old, so we shrugged it off. I told her, half jokingly, that maybe the place was haunted. Trish gave me a tired grin and said, "Yeah, this place has vibes." She looked serious for a moment, and then hurried off, like she didn't want to talk about it anymore. A month after moving in, the static turned into a faint tapping. At first, it was so soft I thought it was just the heating system clanking. But the taps had a pattern. 2 taps, a pause, then 3 taps, another pause, then 2 again. It was so deliberate I started to freak out. Late one night, I grabbed my phone to record the sound as proof, but as soon as I hit record, it stopped. I stayed up for hours that night, phone in hand, waiting for the tapping to start again. It never did. When I finally tried to sleep, I had this unsettling feeling that whatever was making the noise was listening to me too. I considered asking the landlord to come check the pipes, but he was notoriously lazy. And whenever anything did go wrong, like a leaky faucet, he'd send a handyman who spent 5 minutes fiddling with it, then left it half fixed. So I figured it wasn't worth the hassle. Plus, it felt too weird to complain about ghostly tapping. One night, after the tapping had gotten a bit louder, I decided to knock back. I have no clue what possessed me to do it. Maybe I was just curious or tired of feeling scared. I mimicked the pattern. 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. For a moment, nothing. Then it answered, repeating my pattern. My blood ran cold. The hair on my arms stood up so straight, it felt like it could rip through my shirt sleeves. I turned on every light in the apartment. My hands shook as I typed out a frantic post on Reddit, half joking but also dead serious. I think my walls are haunted. Advice? I got some typical "get out now" replies, some ghost hunting tips, and a few jokes about squirrels or raccoons. Some users even suggested I might have a stalker living in the walls. That one messed with my head more than the ghost theories. The next afternoon, I woke up to a strange notification. Someone had DM'd me on Reddit after seeing my post. Their account name was just a jumble of letters and numbers, something like U/TH3FURG0TT3N. They claimed to live in the same apartment building years ago. They said, "You're not crazy. You're hearing it, right? The tapping and static. I left because of that. It doesn't stop." I immediately wrote back, asking them to tell me more. What was causing it? Was it a ghost? Some old radio equipment embedded in the building? But they never responded to my messages again. It was like they'd vanished. Curious, I tried searching the username for any prior posts on the building. There was nothing. The account seemed like it was created just to message me. That was the first time I felt genuinely scared, like there was a real possibility I wasn't alone in my apartment. Over the next few nights, I started documenting everything. I made voice memos every time I heard the tapping or static. Oddly enough, it never came through on the recordings. I'd play them back, only to hear silence. Even the background hum in the room was gone, like the phone's microphone didn't pick up any ambient noise at all. This was beyond weird and started to feel intentional. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise I can only describe as scratching. It was as though someone was running their fingernails along the inside of my bedroom wall, starting at floor level and moving up toward the ceiling. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would explode. I stayed completely still, not wanting to make a sound. That's when I saw it. A shadowy silhouette on my wall, cast by the dim light from the street lamp outside my window. At first, I thought it was just a branch swaying or something, but the shape moved in this unnatural way, like it was crawling along the wall. I sat up quickly, flicked on my bedside lamp, and the shadow was gone. Only the cat figurine on my windowsill stood there, motionless. I barely slept the rest of that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard the scratching start up again. By morning, I was sleep deprived and on edge. I decided to invite Trish over for coffee, see if she'd experienced anything similar. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just told her I'd heard weird noises. She looked relieved that I'd brought it up. She explained that she'd been hearing knocking sounds for months, as if from behind her kitchen cabinets. Sometimes, she said, she could hear faint voices, like a radio station that was just out of tune. But whenever she listened closely, it disappeared. She tried to tell the landlord, but he brushed it off. At least I wasn't alone. Trish and I joked we'd start a haunted building support group, but behind the humor, I saw her eyes glistening with genuine fear. As days turned into weeks, the occurrences became more frequent and stranger. The static was louder. The tapping was more forceful. Scratches became daily. Sometimes I would hear quick, erratic footsteps inside my walls. I was desperate for answers. One night, out of sheer desperation, I decided to check my apartment for any secret compartments or crawl spaces. Old buildings sometimes have them. I knocked on every inch of the walls, listening for a hollow spot. Sure enough, behind an old painting that the previous tenant had left behind, I found a small door, maybe the size of a panel you'd use for accessing plumbing or wiring. The landlord never mentioned it, and it was painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible if you didn't know where to look. My heart hammered as I slid the painting aside. The door had no handle, just a metal latch. My mind raced with what might be behind it. Maybe an old fuse box or extra storage, or the worst-case scenario, a hidden passageway with someone living in it. I went through every possible scenario in my head. It took all my courage to pop it open. Inside was a narrow crawl space that stretched maybe 3 feet back. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight, and there, tucked in the corner, was a small, outdated radio transistor, wires leading deeper into the wall. It looked ancient, with a cracked plastic casing. I reached in, trembling, to turn it off or unplug it. Anything. But as soon as my hand touched it, the thing emitted a sharp burst of static that made me drop my flashlight. The noise was deafening in the small space, like an entire stadium of white noise blasting directly into my ears. I scrambled backward, knocked the door shut, and stood in my living room panting, heart hammering so hard my chest hurt. When I finally found the nerve to open the panel again, the radio was gone. No wires, no device, nothing. Just a bit of dust on bare wood. I couldn't handle it alone anymore. I made another detailed post on Reddit, this time with the title, "I found a hidden radio in my wall, and now it's gone." Help, I described everything. The static, the scratching, the disappearance. My post blew up in a matter of hours. People theorized all sorts of things. Ghosts, time slips, squatters, government conspiracies, cursed objects. Then, in the midst of all the speculation, I got a direct message from the same user as before, u/T83FEORG0TT3N. This time, the message was longer. "You found it, didn't you? The radio. It was there when I lived in 2B. Sometimes I'd see it, sometimes I wouldn't. There's something in those walls. It wants to be heard. I left, but it followed me in my dreams. Save yourself." I felt sick reading that. The user had mentioned apartment 2B. That was my apartment. My hands got clammy, and I started to feel lightheaded. How many people had lived here and experienced the same thing? Why was nobody talking about it publicly? I know it sounds dramatic, but it was around this time that I started noticing the walls themselves seemed off. In certain lights, the paint looked discolored in blotches, almost like water damage, but there was no leak. I ran my hand across it, and the plaster felt colder in those patches, almost clammy. Once or twice I thought I saw something seeping from the wall, but it vanished as soon as I blinked. It wasn't red like blood, more like a grayish, translucent fluid, if that makes sense. I never had time to get a tissue or anything to dab it. It would just absorb back into the paint, leaving no stain behind. I'd stand there, breathless, feeling like I'd lost my mind. It was too bizarre. And yet, so were the radio, the static, and the messages. All of it was too real to ignore. My friends started noticing I was paranoid, jumpy. I barely slept, and when I did, I had horrible nightmares about being walled in. I dreamed of a figure with elongated limbs crawling in the space between the plaster and the brick, tapping its nails in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes convinced I still heard those nails scraping as I returned to consciousness. One Saturday, I heard a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Alvarez, an older woman who lived down the hall. She seemed concerned and asked if I'd been hearing things in the walls. She spoke in hushed tones, glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid someone might overhear. I invited her in, gave her some tea, and she recounted a story that made my stomach drop. She said that years ago, a man named Richard lived in my unit. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself. One day, he started telling people he was picking up strange signals, voices calling out to him through the pipes, telling him secrets. Everyone thought he was having a breakdown. He ended up in a psychiatric ward after claiming he had physically seen a radio appear in his wall. But the real kicker was, he disappeared from the psychiatric ward, just vanished in the middle of the night. The official story was that he escaped, but no one ever saw him again. No credit card usage, no sightings. Mrs. Alvarez whispered that some folks believed he never left the building at all. As she said this, the static flared up from my bedroom, louder than ever, like a burst of white noise mocking us. We both froze, cups of tea rattling in our hands. She left shortly after, telling me to be careful, telling me that this building has a past. I wanted to press her for more, but she wouldn't elaborate. That night, I decided enough was enough. I was going to tear open the wall where I'd found the panel, even if it meant losing my security deposit. Around 11 p.m., I armed myself with a box cutter, a hammer, and a flashlight. My plan was to cut a small hole in the plaster just to see if anything was in there. Wires, a hidden device, or something else. The moment I started cutting, the static kicked in, almost shaking the entire room with its intensity. My overhead light flickered, and the tapping began in frantic bursts. It felt like the entire apartment was protesting, trying to stop me. But I kept going, adrenaline fueling my every swing with the hammer. When I finally broke through a section of the wall, the static stopped abruptly. It was dead silent, so quiet I swear I could hear my own heartbeat echo. I shined my flashlight in. The space behind was bigger than I expected. Maybe a foot of space between my plaster and whatever was behind it. And on the backside of the plaster, I could see faint, chalky markings, like someone had been writing on it. They looked like strings of random letters and symbols, but every now and then I could make out a word in English. Listen, stay, forever. I leaned in closer, my flashlight flickering. Something was behind that section of wall, deeper in. It looked like a shape, too dark to make out. "Hello?" I whispered, not sure why I was even speaking. Then, a sudden jolt. My flashlight went out. I heard a scramble or a scuttling sound, and my mind conjured an image of a tall, thin creature scurrying away on all fours. My blood turned to ice. In a panic, I stumbled backward, dropping my hammer. The flashlight flickered back on for just a second, illuminating an empty space. Nothing was there, but the chalky letters now seemed to glow faintly. I replaced the broken plaster as best I could, grabbed my keys, and fled to a friend's place for the night. That was the last straw. I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment. The next morning, I returned to pack up my belongings. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to leave. My phone buzzed as soon as I stepped inside. Another DM from you/the Fior G0TT3N. Leaving won't help. It's with you now. They're in the static. They're always in the static. I felt an irrational fury toward that message. My hands shook as I typed back, "Who are you? What do you want?" But there was no reply. I checked the user's profile one more time, and it had been deleted. No posts, no comments, no history. It was like they never existed. As I hastily stuffed clothes into boxes, the apartment felt oppressive, like the walls were closing in. The tapping started up again, now furious, hammering relentlessly in random patterns. The ceiling light flickered so erratically I expected it to blow out. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The same silhouette I'd seen on the wall weeks ago, contorting across the plaster, as though it was trying to break through into the room. I screamed, stumbling over boxes, nearly dropping my phone. The shape expanded and collapsed, flickering with the light, pinned to the wall like a living shadow. I grabbed my bags and ran without looking back. I didn't care about the security deposit. I left furniture, clothes, everything behind. I just had to escape. I've since moved to a different city. For a while, I slept on a friend's couch, then found a new place, modern, with freshly painted walls and brand new insulation. No hidden panels, no weird wires. For the first week, I refused to turn off the lights or let the place get too quiet. I left the TV on for background noise, ironically comforting myself with more static. But then the nightmares returned. And worse, sometimes I hear that faint tap 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 at night. It's so soft, I can almost convince myself it's just the wind or the building settling. But deep down, I know it's not. I know it's the same tapping, the same pattern. 2 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. I've even caught glimpses of that same shadow out of the corner of my eye, sliding across the walls in my new apartment. I'll only see it for a fraction of a second, but that's enough to send me into a cold sweat. I rarely browse Reddit nowadays. Sometimes I get anxious thinking about u/th3f4rg0tt3n, about how many people before me were terrorized by whatever is in that building, or if it's just the building at all. Maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe it's in the wires, the signals, floating through the air. Maybe they, whatever they are, can travel through sound waves, electronics, and walls. I wonder if that's what happened to Richard, if he was swallowed whole by the static. If you ever find yourself in an old building, hearing static in the walls late at night, don't check behind hidden panels. Don't knock back when you hear tapping. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. Some signals, once received, can't be unheard. I've told you everything. I don't expect you to believe it fully. I barely do myself. But if you ever hear that faint sound behind your walls, that bizarre radio fuzz, don't listen. Turn up the lights, turn on the music, drown it out. Because the moment you start to pay attention, the moment you let that noise inside your head, you'll never get rid of it. And if you decide not to heed this warning, just remember, you can't say, "No one ever tried to save you." If you see the static, it's already too late. That's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't know where else to go from here, but maybe posting it helps me feel less alone. Maybe it'll help someone else avoid the same fate. And if you find yourself reading this late at night, listening to the walls around you, be careful, because sometimes they listen back. Stay safe, friends, or at least try. Subscribe or don't. Like it or downvote the crap out of it. New horrors drop every Monday. Got a story that belongs here? Drop it in the comments. We're always looking for the next nightmare to bring to life. If it's truly disturbing, we might just tell it. And remember, just because the video ends, doesn't mean the story does.